Good morning, everyone. Good morning, morning, morning. Yep, my name is Mr. G, and I'd like to welcome you to the second day of the Commonwealth People's Forum. Once again, I have to do the housekeeping information. If the fire alarm goes, please make your way to the nearest exits following the signs, and don't stop to collect personal possessions, and do not use the lifts. The assembly point is on the lawn outside the building. As you have already made yourselves familiar with, teas and coffees and lunches to be found in the Cambridge room on the 5th floor. And you'll find the Wi-Fi details on the screen behind me and in the screens of the other rooms that we're using. You guys enjoyed the sessions yesterday? Very, very good. Okay. I've been having quite a few conversations with a few people, and it's been very interesting meeting you. And a lot of people have been asking me about, where are you from? What's your, what brings you here? And just for your information, I'm born in London, but my mother is from Guyana, South America. My father is from Uganda in East Africa. So I'm very much a Commonwealth child, right? And it's just that Guyana is Caribbean. It's in South America, though. Geographically, it's South America, right? It's Caribbean. Please be Caribbean. Right? No. We're Caribbean, but I ain't seen no jaguars in no other part of the Caribbean. You know what I'm saying, right? That's what I'm gonna say. But just inspired by the drumming procession that we saw. I don't know if you guys were downstairs in the main hall, the drumming procession. This is a poem that is inspired by the first time I went to Uganda, and I went to a place called Ginger, which is by the beginning of the River Nile, and you've been there? Yeah, exactly. It's Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Yes, exactly. That's that area. That's the area. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so they had these people that were drumming there. They were drumming there, and the beats that they were playing just seemed so familiar to me. And so I wrote this poem that was inspired by the music that they were playing by the banks of the River Nile. This poem is called "The Sound of the African Drum." The endless rhythm that persists into your soul and just uplifts it from the cold and dark abyss. It makes you whole and is a gift from God, whose role is to assist us, for he knows we can't exist without the sound of the African drum. It booms like a beating heart, heard in the womb completes the start, always consumes till we depart into our tombs deep in the dark, where it exhumes us with its sharp ancestral tunes heard in the park. That's the sound of the African drum. It was once banned with reprimand on plantation fields. Did they understand that in our hand it gave elation and zeal? But you can't plan to just withstand the interracial appeal. The drum pan rules all man, in all occasions they yield. Back to our ancient fathers, strumming so patiently real. It's almost as if God is coming and his invitation is sealed by the sound of the African drum. Can't you hear the gospel, blues, jazz, R&B, soul, rap, rock and roll started with we who brought you salsa, reggae, ragga, merengue, calypso and disco all the way to drum and bass and grime UK. We got the funk, the soca, bossa nova crossed over, but doo-wop and bebop gave us the floss to hip-hop. We've got Afrobeat, soukous and high life, samba and rumba, all number with wonder, but let no man put asunder. The truth is, their root is, if you listen with astuteness, the beat they all loop is the sound of the African drum. Thank you. So, as I said yesterday, we covered inclusive governance, where the motto was leave no one behind. And I sat in on the educational discussion, the institutionalized racism discussion, and I enjoyed many conversations with you all at the reception afterwards. And I was particularly interested in the thoughts around migration and how we need to humanize migrants by telling their stories. And hearing Ben Okri recount a story that his mother told him about the frog was so powerful, because there is a power in stories that can transform. But hearing a story is one thing, acting on it is another. So today's theme is the politics of hope and taking on injustice within the Commonwealth. And now to introduce the first discussion of today is Guadalupe Marengo with the persistence of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Chief. Can I have my bag here with you? Brilliant. Thank you. Just wherever you want to sit, really. Thank you very much. Welcome all to this session today, taking injustice within the Commonwealth. My name is Guadalupe Marengo. I'm originally from Mexico, but I've been here in this city mainly for 30 years. I work for Amnesty International, and I'm the head of the Global Human Rights Defenders Program there. Injustice, yes, injustice is rampant everywhere in the Commonwealth and outside the Commonwealth. Only this morning we woke up to the news that the Prime Minister of this country has to have a special meeting with leaders of the Caribbean because people who arrived to this country, 4 decades ago are being deported or threatened to being deported. Injustice, big injustices. And what is equally worrying is that those who stand up, against these injustices are also being targeted. So they're being smeared, they're being attacked, they're being treated, they're being arbitrarily detained, and in some countries they're even killed. And we are now here, 70 years after the international community committed to respecting human rights with the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, where they all committed for us to live free from want and free from oppression. And then 50 years later, 20 years ago, another big commitment, the commitment to protect and recognize those who defend the human rights. That is the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders that was adopted in 1998. Here we are 20 years later, and defending and standing up against injustice is a dangerous topic. Welcome. I haven't yet introduced you. It's a dangerous issue. So I am very honored to be chairing this panel with these very distinguished sort of human rights defenders who have taken injustice personally in their different countries and in their different themes. We have just arrived. Hi, David. Dave Archambault from the US, who led the opposition to the construction of the Dakota Access pipeline, which we all sort of read about 2 years ago in particular. And here also on my left, I've got Feral Ali Goar, who is a writer, filmmaker, novelist, actress, teacher, and human rights activist. In particularly has been working on reproductive rights within the development agenda and also at the forefront of environmental activism. On my right, thank you, Yokling Chi, who has come into this panel because one of our panelists couldn't attend. Yokli is from Malaysia, and she does activism in the area of the right to health and pharmaceutical companies. And Mike Wemedimo, I think I pronounced your name correctly, Mike. Mike's from Nigeria, and he's the director of the Human City Project, a community-driven media, architecture, urban planning, and human rights movement in Port Harcourt. And there he works in particular with marginalized communities to develop their voice and create a more human city. Thank you very much all for being here. And I am going to start all of these distinguished activists and panelists will talk to us hopefully about their experiences resisting, injustice, the challenges you have all faced, and then hopefully we can also hone in into recommendations to the Commonwealth leaders who will be who are gathering here in London during this week. And just before I give the floor to Feral, who's going to be our first speaker, I'd like just to spend 30 seconds remembering Asma Jahangir, a very, prominent women human rights defender from Pakistan who unfortunately left us in February. She died. So I would like to spend 1 minute silence remembering her, and perhaps also remembering all the human rights defenders who are no longer with us here today. Thank you. Farrell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Thank you for the privilege of speaking about Asma, who was not just formidable and fearless and feisty, but a friend. I met Asma when I was fresh out of university. I'd just taken a degree in political economy from McGill, Montreal. And I'd come home to work with my people on the issues that I had been socialized into by a very strong mother who was born in South Africa at the time of its worst apartheid regime, and who was a member of the African National Congress at the age of 12. She was part of the Youth League. So I've had strong women. I've been surrounded by strong women all my life. And Asma was one of the strongest, if not the strongest. And I hope she's not the last woman that I will receive my inspiration from. I'm going to try and really reduce this ocean, this gigantic woman, into a 5-minute space, since we are told that we have lesser time than we were prepared to spend on giants such as Asma. Asma left behind a legacy which is going to be very hard for any one of us to follow around the world. She worked not just for the protection of the rights of the vulnerable within Pakistan, within South Asia, but internationally. Asma and I met when I was 23, and we were protesting under the military regime of that time against the law of evidence, which reduced the value of the evidence of a woman to half of that of a man. This was part of the Islamization process that was forced upon the nation by an illegitimate ruler of the state, a dictator, General Zia-ul-Haq. It was the 12th of February, it was a spring day, a very fine day in Lahore. And a handful of progressive men and women had gathered at a very busy intersection on the main artery of the city where I was born, Lahore. Suddenly, we were tear-gassed, we were baton charged, and then we were arrested, and we were produced before a military tribunal court. We were to be sentenced under Section 144, which refuses to allow more than one person gathering in a public place to protect the peace. I remember climbing the gate of that military tribunal court and shouting out to people passing by to tell them that this is what was happening. And Asma, who was much smaller than I am, though she was a giant, pulled me down and she said, "Girl, we're in this for the long haul. Save your energy." And we were. We were actually let off by that military tribunal court. We were reprimanded, and we were threatened with dire consequences if we dared to come out onto the streets again to protest anything. It was military rule. We continued with our protests, and 6 months down the road, in September of 1983, a month before I was to get married, we were arrested again because we protested again against the violations of human rights by the excesses of a military regime. This time, we were imprisoned. We were placed in what was known as C category, which was for criminal cases, women who were in for murder. And it was Asma who fought for our rights as political prisoners, and it was Asma with whom I shared the string cot. There were only 6 string cots, and there were 18 of us. So do the math, there were 3 of us to a bed. There was a toilet which overflowed when there was water. The sewage pipes were clogged, the food was inadequate, but Asma fed us with inspiration which I held on to for a good many decades. I'm still here. She's still here in my mind and in my heart. In 1980, Asma had already become very active with the Women's Action Forum, which was the first organized movement of women against the discriminatory laws and practices that were now rampant and were being imposed by an illegitimate military regime. In 1986, she set up the Shelter for Women. She had already set up the first free legal aid center for all persons, men, women, all kinds of religious persuasions. It was in that shelter that a young girl came seeking refuge from a family which refused to let her divorce her husband, to whom she had been married against her will. The young girl was from an affluent family belonging to the province that my father comes from. I knew the family. That young girl in 1999 was shot dead in the presence of Asma's sister Hina, with whom she had started that legal aid center. She was shot in the head by an assassin who had come in with her mother. The mother had knowingly brought in a man to kill her own daughter because she had dared to ask for a divorce. Asma's sister was shot at. She happened to lean down to press the security bell, and the bullet went right past her and hit the back of her seat. When the assassin tried to escape with the dead girl's mother, the security guard shot the assassin dead, but the mother dragged one of the legal aid workers in that legal aid center and took her with to where the father of the dead girl was waiting. And I can never forget what that legal aid worker later told us. She said that as we got off, the man was pacing the veranda of a colonial-era hotel. The British left us with many good things. And he said just these words: "Is it done? Is it done?" That was 1999. It was the year that I was appointed a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador in New York for the Population Fund. Just a few years after that, the United Nations Development Program, which holds consultations with eminent people within the country to determine the kind of programming it must unfold within that country. I came to know that in the discussion on gender programming, the father of that dead girl, the murderer of that dead girl, had been invited for consultations. I wrote an open letter to the United Nations protesting, and I said that I did not wish to represent the United Nations if this is what the United Nations could indulge in, which was absolute hypocrisy. I was then referred to as an ambassador of bad will. I took support and I took heart from people like Asma, who chided me and joked with me, and she said, "Forget it, you can always do good things, even with bad people around you." By that time, she was a special rapporteur for the United Nations on extrajudicial and arbitrary executions. She worked with them for many years, much beyond the time that I managed to hold on to the position of an honorary ambassador. I resigned in protest when the United Nations could not stop a false war in the Gulf, when the United States and the NATO forces invaded Iraq as much as the British have bombed Syria just a week ago. I protested then, I protest now, and that should be on record today. Asma defended the voiceless. She defended those who were powerless. She came from a background of extreme privilege. Her house, when you go to mourn her, resonates with art and culture and antiques and wealth. And yet she spoke for the poor. She defended the poor with her life. There was a time when I witnessed her mobbing. She was nearly lynched. She was almost killed when she dared to defend Salamat Masih, a 14-year-old Christian boy from a very poor family who had been convicted and sentenced to death on charges of blasphemy, a black law in our country which has cost the lives of many, including a sitting governor who spoke up in the name of Asma Bibi, who also is in prison serving a life sentence for charges that I cannot even repeat, for I will then be accused of having committed blasphemy with which I will pay with my life. Asma stood up. Asma organized strange events such as a marathon to ensure that men and women can actually run together. If they can work together, they can live together, they can actually run in a marathon. She was mobbed again, and it was the police this time which tore off the clothes off her back. And I remember her words, which haunt me today. She said, she used to call me Ferial and not Ferial, which is my name. And she said, I couldn't see my back, but I could feel that there were no clothes on me. And they did it to humiliate me. They did it to break me. But they couldn't break her. She went on to continue to defend defenseless women, men, and children. I leave you with the words she left me with. She said, if you have a heart, you feel. If you have eyes, you see. She left me with that heart. She left us with those eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Feral, for that beautiful remembering what ASMA stood for and what you all here stand for as well. We're in here for the long haul, she said to you 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I wonder, Dave, whether you can sort of tell us about Indigenous rights and your experience with Indigenous rights, and we're in here for the long haul, I assume. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you. That was beautiful. I'm from the United States, and you would think that everything in the United States is great, but where I live, we have a high rate of poverty. We have 40% poverty, and this is the norm within Indian country, within our tribal nations. So we have 40% poverty rate. If you look at the 10 poorest counties in the United States, top 5 are from the Great Sioux Nation, are from my tribes. 5 counties are the top poorest counties. We have an unemployment rate of 60%. And we're always told, why is it that you want to live like this? And it's not that we choose to live like this. There's a deep-rooted history that exists from beginning of time, from when we can remember, when the first people came to the United States over 500 years ago. There was this thing called the Doctrine of Discovery. And the Doctrine of Discovery legitimized and legalized dominance, one race dominating over another. And as explorers went out and they found new lands, there was new riches. And as long as it was called Christian dominion, the papal bulls, as long as the people that occupied those lands did not believe in God or know God, they were not humans. And that's what we've been dealing with for the past 500 years. You would think that things would get better as time went on and equality would come through, but if you think about every infrastructure project that took place in the United States, it had a negative impact on somebody. There was a cost that somebody had to pay. And I think of the first infrastructure project as being the railroad system. The railroad system came through the Great Plains in North America, where we occupied the lands, and it opened up hunting and mass killing of buffalo. What that did was, that was our way of life, that was our economy, that was our housing, our shelter, our tools, everything we used with the buffalo. And when the railroad system came through, it almost there was only 100 9 buffalo recorded alive roaming the plains in 1889. In only 80 years prior to that, there was over 60 million buffalo roaming the plains. So the railroad system, infrastructure project, came and just changed our way of life. There's multiple infrastructures that follow. There's highways, there's telephone lines, there's telecommunication, there's all these things. But there was one that continues today, and that's a pipeline. So there was this pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline, that came through, and our tribe has suffered so much. We pay the cost for all the infrastructures in the past for this great nation. And we continue to pay today for those things that happened in the past. And the cost that we're paying is the high rate of poverty, the broken promises from the federal government, from the U.S. government. And now we have another infrastructure project threatening the lives of our future generations, and that's Dakota Access Pipeline. So having to explain that history, why or how did the resistance happen for Dakota Access Pipeline? I think if you push a people down long enough, eventually they're going to rise. And what we did was we invested in our youth, and we encouraged our youth to speak their mind. We're encouraging your youth to revitalize our nation. And in doing that, they had the courage to stand up and start saying, this is not right. This pipeline, which is upstream, crossing under Missouri River, the purest, cleanest body of water that we depend on, is now threatened. And so as this pipeline goes through, our kids are standing up, our youth are standing up, and that's what we're starting to recognize. And myself personally, at the time, I was the chairman, or it's kind of like the president of our nation. And I was always saying, you gotta believe in the youth. You gotta listen to them. You gotta encourage them to talk. They're the ones who are gonna be here when we're not. And when they spoke, it was up to the tribe that I represented. It was a tribal government. It was a government that got behind them. So this was something that was unusual, and it kind of thrusted me into a place where I really didn't understand. So you had activism with a government, and as the tribal leader of the government, we're going up, and it was easy because we got a lot of support. We got over 10,000 people from around the world to come and stand behind us. As we went up against the state government, as we went up against the federal government, we were going up against the industry, we're going up corporations, we're going up against unions, we're going up against everybody, and we have this momentum behind us. We're going up against federal laws, and that was one thing that it was. That helped facilitate this whole pipeline. Today, the pipeline is under the Missouri River. There isn't a resistance in the location right now. But I don't think that it's over. Even though the federal laws, the court system, the political system, the activism, the on-the-ground work, even though that seems like it subsided for the moment, it helped us realize, and it helped America realize that indigenous peoples, the 566 tribes that are still present today, have a voice. And there's going to be more resistance. You can no longer push us, and you won't see the pipelines coming like they were. You won't see the wrongs because the youth are now starting to rise and something has awakened. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave, for reminding us how, there's a lot of actors out there that one has to resist against, I mean, when power is against us, it's big, it's corporations. And I'm going to bring in here Yoglin, who has been sort of doing activism against big pharmaceutical companies and in relationship to the right to health. Yoglin.
Thank you very much. And good day to all our friends and colleagues who are here. Thank you so much to the both of you. For the few minutes that I'm sharing here, I want to talk about a different type of tyranny, the tyranny of big corporations using so-called intellectual property rights to create monopolies, and it's not even profit. I think it is a level of rentier, profiteering that does not make sense from a point of view of investment returns, does not make sense in terms of rewarding innovation. And this is in the area of medicines. And this is something that I think from the human rights point of view, the right to health has been acknowledged, but what does it mean practically? I'm only going to touch here on the right to affordable medicines. It's a big area. I think there's going to be a discussion on universal health care. There are many, many aspects of health. But just the issue of medicines, which is a small part, but one of the biggest percentages of public health budget spending is actually in medicines. And today we hear a lot, even this morning from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, that non-communicable diseases, this will be the scourge of public health for all our countries. It says a lot for our unsustainable consumption and development patterns that we have new diseases. We haven't grappled with communicable diseases, and we now have non-communicable diseases. So if you look at areas like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular, heart diseases, on top of tuberculosis, which have new levels of resistance, and so we need new medicines. Hepatitis C, I think many of you may have read the debate around the fact that we do have one medicine, a class of medicines which actually can cure hepatitis C. It's very rare in the 21st century, with all our claim to knowledge and science, that we have very few new medicines that actually can cure. And so I just want to tell the story of hepatitis C for a start. But before I go into that particular experience, I think one of the things I just want to touch about is, if you look at pharmaceutical companies, the top few, have a combined revenue that exceeds the top tens of countries' economies. So if we talk about the Commonwealth, we talk about small islands, middle-income countries, a few big companies, and they keep merging, whether it's in agribusiness, in energy, in pharmaceutical and chemicals, they are getting bigger and bigger. So when we talk about human rights, and we are fighting for human rights, and we hear the stories of how human rights defenders are persecuted continuously, yet the one group in society that has got more and more rights created and protected and enforced are corporations. And so in the area of so-called intellectual property rights, this is a very new term, because before this, if we had things like patents, so we have the notion, from a long time ago, started in the Industrial Revolution in this country, that if you invent something, you get rewarded. So you get a temporary monopoly, so that you are the only one who can produce, manufacture, and sell a product. And that is a privilege. Any one of us who study the law of patents and intellectual property know it is a privilege. But today we have the term intellectual property rights. So if it's a creation of the mind, like books or poetry, we have copyright. We have trademark for brands, and we have patents for inventions. But all these have been clustered together very recently in the name of being called a group called intellectual property rights. And that is actually the result of the negotiation of all the trade agreements that has created the World Trade Organization. So it's only in the early 90s that we have this one international treaty called the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights, what we call TRIPS, and you do trip over it all the time. And this TRIPS treaty, for the first time, all the member states, and most of us, except for a few countries left, are members of the WTO with its entire family of agreements, many of which are systemically very flawed, very anti-human rights, very anti-sustainable development. And one of these sort of not even trade, it's called trade related for a very good reason. It's nothing to do with free trade, it's about monopoly. So all the different types of patents and trademark and all that and copyright got clustered under this treaty. And for the first time there's an international obligation to give a minimum of 20 years protection to all kinds of products and technology. Before this, countries have the freedom to choose or not to choose to give monopolies of that sort. So food, seeds, medicines, they were very naturally not to be given that kind of monopoly. But with this treaty, you have to give it. So medicines fall into this. Yet there are some flexibilities left, under certain circumstances without the consent of the patent holder or the copyright holder. Governments and public health, for example, can still use certain measures to get cheaper medicines. But this is the regime, this is the law that has actually created intellectual property rights to be enforced. And it is a private right. It is a private privilege, because if you get it, the state gives it to a company or an inventor, but today very few inventors are individuals. They're all owned by companies. So the biggest numbers of patents are actually held by companies. And when the government gives a privilege, it comes with obligations. But the balance of obligations has been shifting and shifting and shifting. And this is done through many of us sitting in this room and beyond are fighting against trade agreements. In the North Americas, in the South Americas, in Asia, we have lots of so-called free trade agreements, which are not about trade. If you look at these agreements, they have chapters, 20, 30 chapters, covers every aspect of our life. They are not trade agreements. They are very anti-human rights agreements. And those agreements create new obligations. And there, in the intellectual property chapter, every flexibility you may have that's left in the TRIPS agreement is being chipped away. And behind the governments that push, including the United States especially, and even parts of the European cluster of governments, behind that push for these very anti-human rights, anti-public health kind of intellectual property rules and standards is the big pharmaceutical industry. Because industry funds election campaigns. They own people who are sitting in congresses and parliaments. And so they shape the standards, they shape the law, and they legalize really something that is illegitimate. So in the area of medicines, many people around the world have actually been fighting. The access to affordable medicines movement started with the explosion of HIV/AIDS. And many of us, I think, remember about 20 years ago when South Africa had the nerve to make a change to one of their laws. And 40 biggest companies in the world threatened to sue the government of South Africa. This actually was a trigger for many of the groups working, patient groups, NGOs, health activists, who were working at the local level to fight for public health. Because we do have a universal declaration of alma mater for primary health care, prevention of diseases. But today, we've gone away from that. So my appeal to the Commonwealth and to all governments, let's remember what is our fundamental right to health obligation. It is a public space. It is not an area where we can surrender that space to private companies. It is not an area where we have to have returns to investment. Because we talked about investment in education this morning. Investment in health is very, very important because these two go very much together. And I remember reading about the first time in Switzerland, when the Swiss parliament at the turn of the 19th century decided to introduce patent law for the first time. They had hearings. The strongest opposition voices came from the big companies. What is today Novartis, Civic, these big companies, they all got together and said, if you pass this draconian patent law in Switzerland, you will kill innovation. You will kill research and development, because we, the companies, need to have access to knowledge so that we can innovate and build on what others have done. Because innovation is about building. We talk about the Commonwealth and the community of knowledge systems. It is about sharing. It is about building on each other's knowledge. It's about collaboration. But research in the field of pharmaceuticals and many other areas today, it is not about collaboration. It's about competition. Whoever gets there first gets a patent, gets a monopoly, and so much of drug development gets left behind because there's no point going to the market because somebody else has gone there first. So when the cure for hepatitis C came, the cost, the first time the medicine was registered in 2013, it was in the United States, $84,000 US for 12 weeks. That's about $1,000 a pill. This is a drug that was not developed by this company. They bought a smaller company that developed it. $84,000. You always price medicines in the United States first because you think that people can bear the cost. And then you go around the world and you give lower and say, I'm giving you a discount. In my country, in Malaysia, it cost $100,000 US for 12 weeks. The generic version is $100. So we fought with our Ministry of Health, the patient groups, the NGOs, and then we had companies telling us, you are not allowed to do this because your country, your government violates intellectual property. We didn't. It's all very legal. And then they accused the NGOs of going around giving wrong information. This sort of discrediting goes across all kinds of rights. So in the end, we won the battle because our Ministry of Health convinced the Ministries of Trade that this is a collective national need. So in the name of public health, our government issued a compulsory license, and we started treating for free in the public hospitals last month. So from 300,000 Malaysian ringgit to 1,000, 100,000% drop. Every one of us deserve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us where the rights lie, who are actually getting the rights and who aren't getting the rights, and the issue of resisting and being smeared, you know, all the time, which is what happens to human rights defenders where they're trying to take injustice personally. Mike, I wonder whether you can give us a quick 1 minute, 2 minute, you know, your recommendations in order to sort of beat the enemy.
I have no recommendations for the government because I live in a part of the world where participation in decision-making is seen in many ways as a sign of weakness, something to be avoided. And so our work focuses very much on creating demand-side platforms, creating the popular conditions for accountability, trying to reduce the scope of impunity by empowering people. And so for us, community organization, popular mobilization is at the heart of what we do. Living in an oil city, living in a part of the world which has been part of a trade in dark cargo for 500 years, first human beings, then palm oil, then coal, and now oil. We have seen the way in which the material violence of extraction and the social violence of segregation has been inscribed into the space of the city. And so in a historical period, an unprecedented historical period where for the first time most people live in cities, we see that the urban majority, although they are physically and in many ways socially shaping the face of cities across the developing world, are excluded from decision making. And so what we do is to try and create spaces in which marginalized communities can give voice to their vision. And we'd hoped that some of our colleagues would be here to play some music today from Port Harcourt. Unfortunately, despite the really valiant efforts of the Commonwealth Foundation, people working around the clock to get them here, these people from the Commonwealth were excluded from a Commonwealth People's Forum on inclusion. So we'll be hearing from them digitally, and we have some colleagues and friends, some of whom have just come back from Port Harcourt, who will be playing some music live. So hopefully you'll get a sense, a feeling of what that voice does, its power.
Lovely, thank you. And just before we go into that, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes perhaps of questions from the audience, suggestions, questions for our panelists. If you could sort of give us your name when you ask your question, and also tell me if you're directing it to someone in particular. And maybe I'll take 3 and then sort of, yes, one person here, please, and then that person there. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, well, thank you. It's a fantastic panel, and thank you for remembering Asma the way you did. I'm Shahidul Alam. I'm from Bangladesh. Tomorrow, our Prime Minister will be giving a talk in London, arranged by ODI, where she talks about the success of the country, of how Bangladesh becomes a middle-income country. And of course, in the process of doing that, one of the things they say is, let's get economic progress for the moment. We'll worry about democracy and human rights later. Mm-hmm. And this is a formula that seems to be coming through. In 2018, we have so far had 3 people killed, 2 people kidnapped, 1 person raped. Mm-hmm. Primarily in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. We have military occupation in my country. We have a government that is unelected, that does not have the right, that does not have legitimate grounds for being in the government. Yet, we are in a situation where those are the very partners that are chosen in these situations. We have a business forum here where the very people who've been aiding and abetting this process are invited. And I find it somewhat hypocritical that while on the one hand human rights activists are brought in, on the other hand, at the same time, we have autocratically run regimes being feted and their business partners supported in the same way.
Thank you for those thoughts. Yes, please. Yes, thank you. There's another person here. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, please.
So I want to compliment Farial for the courage that you've had to speak about such an important issue. In Canada, the question of religious freedom is a huge issue, and we've been following things that's taking place. In fact, in my remarks yesterday with the panel, I think 1 seat should be left the next time around for panel on the question of religious freedom. It's an issue that is for the future, but perhaps if we don't address it today, we'll probably have more of the issues that you're having in your country. I had an opportunity to speak with somebody from Bangladesh during the session a little while ago, and I asked him about the question about freedom, religious freedom there. And it's interesting that his country has not inserted, they call it the People's Republic of Bangladesh, and therefore they have that freedom and opportunity to live their faith or choose not to live anybody's faith as they choose, so there's that freedom. But in your country, you do not have that luxury because the religion is inserted in your constitution. In Canada, we had a body that was put together about...
Can you stick to the question?
Yes.
Sorry.
We had the body that was called
Thank
the Office of Religious Freedom that tried to assist people around the world on that issue. Let me put the question then to you.
Thank you.
In the Muslim world, how can we bring about an opportunity and change that religious freedom can be accepted and can be developed? Your comments. I know it's a difficult question to answer, but how do we go about it? Because it's really going to affect the future of civil society.
Thank you. I'll take one more and then we can sort of... sorry that we have to be strict with time. I really apologize.
I'm Shipa Hafiza,
Hi.
again from Bangladesh.
I've chosen all the Bangladeshi people.
The human rights
Stick to the
defenders.
question, please. Thank you.
And thank you so much for starting with Asma Jahangir, who I also worked with in some time of my life. These human rights defenders are all around in our countries, and because of them, really, we are where we are now, with all the other atrocities happening by the state, by the law enforcing authority and all others. My question is only one thing. How can we connect these human rights defenders, particularly from the local areas? In the city areas, human rights defenders, some of them become very known, but they may not doing that justice. The one single human rights defenders in a very remote areas are doing it. How can we connect them with the whole issues and make stronger? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take these 3 questions. I won't ask you all to answer all of them, but I wonder whether we can start with you, Feral, on the issue of freedom of religion. And then maybe if I pass on to you, Dave, and you can talk a bit about development and, you know, versus human rights versus democracy, you know, what goes first and why, your ideas on that. And then maybe I'll move on to you on the defenders question. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Is it Mr. Saldana? Your question? I remember you from yesterday. You made some very pertinent observations for that panel. And it's an extremely important question because we are grappling with it not just within Pakistan. The Muslim Ummah is a huge one. The Muslim community across borders is a very large one. And from the late 1970s, actually following from 1975 and the defeat of the American forces in Vietnam, there was a concerted effort to insert radicalization and the concept of the jihad within the Muslim Ummah by none other than the Central Intelligence Agency. There is evidence to this. There are papers. There are declassified documents I can share with you if you'd like them. Zbigniew Brzezinski, the then Secretary of State, wrote the entire strategy, which was called the Bear Trap, if you'd like to pull that up. So it has everything to do with international agendas for resources to build the corporations that we talked about, which exploit all humans regardless of religious persuasions. In terms of the practical application of the freedoms to profess the religion or the belief system that you wish to within the Muslim Ummah, the fact is that within Islam, there is no persecution. It doesn't exist. I say vociferously, it does not exist. The notion of radical Islam is not a Muslim one. It has been imposed upon us. ISIS is not a conglomeration of Muslim radicalism. It is an agenda that is being, I mean, you can read Robert Fisk in The Independent, and he'll tell you that the tunnels in Duma today lead to Westminster, where we sit today. This is evidenced. This is not just a mad woman from Pakistan, ranting and raving. Now, in terms of my country, the Objectives Resolution of 1948 was an insertion into the Constitution. It was not the vision of the founder of Pakistan. You know very well, Mr. Saldana, the speech of August 11th by the then Governor General. Go, you are free to worship in your temples. This was what Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, stated. He wanted a secular state. We were hijacked by Islamicists who supposedly speak in my name. I do not allow them to co-opt me, my spirit, my sisters' lives, because they are not our legitimate leaders. They are not the legitimate leaders of the Muslim world. In Islam, the word Islam is derived from the Arabic word salam, which is peace. We greet each other with salamu alaikum, may peace be upon you. So we have been demonized, we have been vilified, because there are oil fields that the Muslim world happens to sit on. If we were growing peanuts, Mr. Saldana, I don't think anybody would be interested.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, any thoughts on development versus human rights?
I think, when I brought up the doctrine of discovery, what was happening was you had the state, you had a kingdom, marry with the church. And when these two came together, then it was under a religion that encouraged the expansion, the discovery of new lands, and the concept of wealth became the primary focus. Now, if we fast forward to what's happening today in regards to development, we have the government, and we have, instead of the church, we have corporations. So when corporations are becoming one with the government, you're seeing history repeat itself. And the laws that are being created are being driven by corporations. they own the lawmakers. And so regardless of whatever stage a nation is at, when you have the government marrying something else for riches or for wealth, human rights are set aside.
Thank you. Joe, human rights defenders who sort of are outside, if you want, the mainstream, in remote areas, the ones that aren't here, what do we do in order to sort of include them in these conversations? Any?
I think that is a big challenge for all of us as civil society organizations and individuals. I think we all work in silos. I think that we need to, because the first level of protection is among ourselves. When we organize communities, that's what we do, vulnerable communities. And I don't think it's a separate issue. I think the human rights defenders are those in our communities who take that one step more. And all the forces are always trying to split those people from their communities. So it is across the board. I think we need to protect the community, the collective, and we also need to protect each other. So in each of our individual countries, I think those of us who are NGOs who are based in the urban areas, we need to connect much more with what's happening outside. So the work, I think this whole thing about development and urbanization, it's almost like it's inevitable that we're all going to move towards urbanization. First of all, it's not sustainable. And secondly, we need the countryside. We need food, we need land, we need to protect our forests and our waters. So we have to go back and actually, we're so fragmented. So the vulnerability of the human rights defenders at the local level is the result of that. So I think the challenge to us first, how do we reconnect within our own countries and across? Because NGOs in the civil society space have a lot of that connecting across borders. The most vulnerable people are known, and that is a kind of protection. Because sometimes, you get backlash, but you also get protection. But there are many, many nameless and faceless people for the outside world, and that's, I think, our challenge. And the other thing, I think, is also recapturing. We fight against the state in many ways, but I would distinguish between the politicians and the concept of the public space. We're not in a world today where the state is going to disappear. So we have to regain the state for the people. And working at the local level, we find that a lot of local governments are more accountable because they are right there. Of course, there's also corruption is everywhere. Corruption is in companies and banks. It's not just. So I think if we work along that, we work with local, and many of us are working with local governments. And if the local the local appointed or whatever governance does not work or they're illegitimate, communities form their own leadership. And I think that's where, when we build from that, then we challenge at every level. Elections, my country is having an election on the 9th of May. All of us are talking about elections. I think in the Women and Peace discussion yesterday, the British system that we also inherited, the parliamentary system, the first across, gets it. It's not very legitimate. So part of the reform that we talked about, talking about law reform and institutional reform, we need to have reform of what democracy means. If casting the vote is so important, how can politicians with less than the majority, far less than the majority vote, actually run the country and say this is an elected government? I think those are the things that we need to work at. And the defenders have to actually have their faces known. And that's, a lot of it, I think, is our own responsibility too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to stop now, or fortunately, because we're going to hear Mike talk to us about what they are doing in their neck of the woods on artists and other issues related to and how you can do resistance through that medium. But maybe I just wanted to end by thanking everybody here and also saying we aren't the, and you mentioned it, the people's Commonwealth. And in Latin America, we have a saying, if the people get together, that's the way to beat them. So el pueblo unido jamás será vencido, we say. So let's do that. Exactly. Yes, the fight continues. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mike, you're going to do the business?
I'm going to speak only as long as it takes to get the chairs off the stage and the instruments on the stage. Just a little by way of background.
Sorry.
What you're going to see and hear are the sights and sounds from Chikoko Studios, which is the music component of a project called the Human City Project. And The music component is supported by the Commonwealth Foundation. Thank you, folks. And it's a studio and a project based in the slums of Port Harcourt. And in Port Harcourt, which is a city in the creeks, around 500,000 people live in these very dense informal settlements that ring the city. And in 2009, the governor decided that he would demolish them all. I mean, the logic was something like, slums are ugly, so if we destroy them, the city's more beautiful. Slums are full of poor people, so if we demolish them, the city becomes richer. And what was then initiated was a series of forced evictions in which many thousands of people would lose their homes in a single weekend. And the first song that you'll hear, called Zombie, is a re-version of Fela Kuti's famous song, Zombie, the song for which his venue, called the African Shrine, was demolished. And this re-version is about the sustained and systematic attempt to physically destroy the communities of the urban poor, and about their response, about their determination to give voice to a city that is for all its citizens. So you'll see a little video from Felibration, where the band played on the 12th of October 2017, exactly 8 years after some of their colleagues were shot for demonstrating against forced evictions in Port Harcourt. And you'll see the journey that they have taken. I wish they could have taken a short hop over deserts and seas to be here with you today, but we have Amadeus, who actually has just come back from Port Harcourt, who has taken over there, courtesy of the Commonwealth, to work with lots of the musicians. So it's beautiful that he can join us here today. He mixed and mastered many of the tracks that you'll be listening to. Mark Levine, Professor Mark Levine, co-initiator of Sessions in the Shed, the music project. You'll see him jumping around in the same shirt, actually, on the video. Kaidi, the wunderkind of the new jazz circles in London. It's very lovely that we're going to hear him today. He's a young British Nigerian who's never been to Nigeria. We hope to change that. And Adiba on the decks, thank you. So enjoy. Please dim the lights, roll the video.
so big. No problems, my brother, how it's gonna be. Cause the things that they get and the things that they see, and they feel some my people, they don't agree. I'm bringing back this one belongs to me. I'm from the city where you walking 24/7 and you ain't paying no money. I'm from the city where you talking freedom, they put it for jail. It's not funny. Yeah, I got to right my wrongs to know my rights. I got to sacrifice to live this life. When the police acting like they owe me life, they make me pay some money, that's right. Some be looking like criminals. Why they take me for a militant? Some be looking like criminals. Why they take me for a militant? Yeah, yeah.
All in a spend, not hear nothing.
Because of corruption, then send to me to shoot gun, destroy everything we work for. I know this will do they stand attention. They want on us, but we no go down. They want on us, so we no go down. Zombie yo, attention, tease, oh scatter, it's another.
Zombies not that great to me. Zombies not that protest you. You send your tractors to the grave, but you forget in the grave our house. Why you gonna tell us to vote when you know say our votes no count? Why you make to your campaign when you know say we know they your mouth? Hey, your pie, hey, leave your house. I said change your name. You know they for the mouth. You know that's it right to line. Don't bring up high. Leave your house. Change your name. You know they for the mouth. You know that's it right to line.
I don't want what I've been sold. Money, power, greed, control. Why work your body to the death when you can focus on the rest?
Yo, I hear voices, yet all I see is kept silence. Police brutality and politics, they cause violence. I hear sirens, ambulance with dead bodies of the miners. After we vote, they stop to mind us. Wash your hands off our case like punches violence. Propaganda plus lies, now them use bias. This man can't see us, not only we they see them, yet they say that we need them. Our money they see them. Goddamn, all these things now they make me vest quick. Make us promises, so when they win, they forget quick. With the young ones think of death quick. I get with the system is that's it, brothers and step brothers. Mothers betray others, advising me to sex slavery just to bring rubbers. Souls drop out of school, man, to become rubbers. This is just a few men among others where you're frustrated, but they are not.
I don't want what I've been sold. Money, power, greed, control. Why work your body to the death when you can focus
tractors stole the grave. I came from London to check up on your area to see what I want for the people in Nigeria. I go chop a goosey soup and I chew upon the suya. You say me how you day? I reply, oh yeah, tell ya. Observe how my sisters there are happy without TNT. See what misery, men, money and corruption bring Chicoco. Community radio station, broadcast vibration, love and innovation. Send out the signal, Radio Chicoco. Educate the politician, educate the popo. This is how new school business is done, blood. Put away the gun, blood. Start having fun, blood. More people on the mission. Becoming self-sufficient. Creating less pollution. Discovering nutrition. More shared resources. Less competition. Chicago. Eardrum. Radio. Vision. Drug of the nation.
What you heard is true. I was raised up in the bush, raised up into lies where there's not too many truths. Raised up in the time when the tears turn to juice, and pain is the word to find the youth. I said, what you heard is true. I was raised up in the bush, raised up into lies where there's not too many truths. Raised up in the time when the tears turn to juice, and pain is the word to find the youth. But I'm confident. Ooh, la la la. Confident. Ooh, la la la. Ooh, la la la.
Me ask them for house and they give me bulldozer. Me ask them for fours and they give me bullet. Me ask them for fours and they give me bullet. Me ask them for house and they give me bulldozer. Me ask them for house and they give me bulldozer.
You're thinking I won't make it, you gon' find me there. We strive to survive, take a low life high. Make it or live it, I'm not gonna stop. Confident I got it all. Awesome P, I'm standing tall. Ain't giving up for not enough. Stopping nigga, what for? Huh? No. How I feel right now, but you can never know. I'm confident, I don't pretend. Tryna stop me, I break it down. Cause you do your English, I'm begging, please break it down. We serious, it's not clown. If you like it, frown. I don't really care, cause all I wanna say is that they don't really care about us.
Thank God for the likes of Martin Luther King, the veterans who helped me struggle in some more strange fruits. I no longer hanging Malcolm X. You black and you confident who put the door. You would die with black president. I mean Barack Obama, one love to Mandela. Just 7 years in prison, went on the long of the freedom. Johnson, Nigel McCoy, Philip McGrady, Sarah Boone, Mary Brown, all black inventors. I'm black and I'm confident and I'm proud of my skin. The fact that I'm black doesn't make me less of a man. We are born to do great things. I can feel it in my genius, my calculator, my heart to reach. God to be black if you were mad.
Yo, I said the scars of my
the signs of my struggle. I've been through too many troubles. I've been too many hurdles. Tried to face my own life. Is like facing the horror. I know I'm facing the terror. You know I'm facing the problem, but I ain't changing for nothing. I ain't changing my strive. You know everything that I've been through always kept me alive. All the time I had to fight for the things that was always mine, my right. I never left it for nobody else to shine. So I'm on my way up, step up to the game. So on my way up, step up. I ain't going slow. On my way up, I need this city go slow. See my wounds, this way you will know where I'm coming from. Not every man can survive in the streets where I come from. Don't know about heaven, I know hell, cause I was raised in a dungeon. I've been through the fire and I have even praised the storm. Been to the point where I thought maybe I should raise my guns. Not every man can survive in the streets where I come from. Don't know about heaven, I know hell, cause I was raised in a dungeon. I've been through the fire and I have even praised the storm. Been through the world where I thought that maybe I should raise my guns, yeah. This is what I become. The guns, the war, it's killing me, yeah. Pain made me a dog. Just get to be in church. Said so many prayers, but I don't think they can get it to God. I'm too scared to face my fears, and as it appears, everything is broken. My hope, it's all lost. Whole granite, soul doors. Problems are so close. I pray I survive.
It will be
surrounded by only the rich. See, I ain't playing nigga, life is a... I don't give it much, I give it a bit. It's my mind, it's my mouth, permit me to speak. I must say that we are living in the shit that we're believing, that someday will come to an end. My brother, that shit depends on where you go or your plan is. Cause you know this world is damaged, and you know a lot of things gone wrong, and you know that this is not my song. Freedom, freedom, I am freedom, I find freedom on my mind as I walk down this road. Freedom, I hope, freedom, I find freedom on my mind as I walk down this road.
This song na about all the plenty things wey men dey do us. As we no dey complain, we want make men know say women we no be monkey wey go dey work, and men be baboon wey go dey chop. See me with fun, no frown. See you with woman, no friend. All my contacts, all your contacts. When you stop me, I love. When I stop you, no respect. All my salary, I know. But when they pay you, if you know service condition, we no go reach conclusion. If you know service conditions, we no go reach conclusion.
At once they just break, kukuruku. All your brothers they can smoke or oppress you. Wash plates, scrub pots, you know clean. Father come around and give you very hot slap. You think say you find or you think say you send. I pay your bills daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. After you go school finish, you go marry. All the knowledge where you get your education. This time around, we go teach another lesson. All I'm trying to say is all of us got same rights. I be lady and I get power. I'm a stress fighter and I know go tired.
Who gets it, baby? I'm too old. You like to party. I like that too. You want watch ball. Want watch movie. You like to jolly. You be doctor. Be engineer. You be professor. Be lecturer.
share in the Commonwealth. Who do you get to do your dirt? Rich people of our Commonwealth. What do you think a poor life is worth? Which people get to come and work and whose voices go unheard? We wish that we were there, only so that we could share the Commonwealth we've created here. Where did you think was the center of the world? We are drawing another map of the earth. What do you think the Commonwealth is worth? We wish that we were there. We're there. We wish that we were there. There. We wish that we were there. There.
Okay, 1 2 1 2. A big thanks to Michael Uwemedima and Chikoko Sounds.